start recording?
Are we? How about we go all the way to the beginning?
No.
No, that's dumb
So
as hell.
this is coming from key question 3. This is the point which we're starting.
You
How
are
did
joined by
events in
Joseph,
1989 lead to the
artist,
sudden
and
opening of the
Pierre.
Berlin Wall? So we've been through Hungary.
Everything.
They
all
opened
that.
their border 2nd of May 1989. In that year, 50,000 East Germans left. In Austria, they
30,000.
could get.
30,000.
I said 30,000.
It's a 50.
We're now looking at the impact of
I have
immigration.
video evidence, Artif. Okay, so they left to Austria. They claimed an Austrian passport, well, a Western passport that they could then use. They were free. Technically,
So,
it wasn't legal, I believe. They just could do it anyway.
Yeah,
But
they just
then
left.
yeah.
9/11, Hungary lifted all
1989.
restrictions. People could leave whenever.
But
And
then the SED were like, "Oh no,
yeah,
too many people are leaving."
SED panicked,
So they
closed
What's
the border.
the
Closed
significance
the
of the
border
people
with
leaving?
Czechoslovakia.
So 75% were under 40, so young people, workers that
Yep.
the SED
As
really
always,
needed
yeah.
and
Yeah,
relied
they were
on.
excited to become
Similar.
West Germans.
And
Yeah,
they were all
similar
skilled
to,
workers.
Similar to the Berlin Wall
Yeah.
when they built that. There's similar reasons. All were qualified. Many were in professions in demand, so doctors, that type of thing. Exactly the type of people the GDR couldn't lose, and that's why this immigration and the opening of Hungary's border with Austria was very important.
Yep, it had an immediate impact, which was even more serious
All
to
caps.
the prospect of the SED control of the state. Because those who stayed, it was seen as further opposition within the GDR because they're like, hey, the people that we need to run the country and like make it thrive, they're all gone now.
Yeah, all the important, because the GDR's economy was in the dump. They needed to do everything they could to bring it back, and
Yeah,
losing your trained professionals is not conducive to that.
yeah. So
yeah.
it
When
probably
you've
meant
got
they were also
250,000 East Germans leaving from January to November, 11 months, you got an issue.
And
it also
that
probably
basically-
meant that they'd probably be a bit strict on the people left behind. They couldn't afford to let them leave, so they'd probably reduce their rights, wouldn't let like them travel as much. So which would probably make them want to leave even more.
Hey, let's send this to a
Um,
group chat before we go to bed.
Yeah.
Right.
So we have a bit more to do.
Yeah.
For those who stayed, the massive So like I said, mass immigration was a catalyst for further opposition.
Yeah, people were now
Um,
kind of emboldened. They were seeing that,
Mm.
like, all this change was happening, all these people were leaving, and they're thinking, we don't have to be as secretive about this anymore. It's kind of out in the open, people
Yeah.
want to leave.
New protest
It's less
groups. They were
taboo.
like, you know what?
I imagine
let's
that
fight
sort of
about it.
thing was considered taboo.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of out in the open that people weren't content anymore. So they're like, you know what? Let's express this.
Murder on the Orient
Two of the
Express.
leading protest groups, for Democracy Now, which was consisting of intellectuals, and New Forum. Don't know if you actually need to know those.
Yeah. So
Probably
this was
don't.
still when people wanted reforms in the GDR. They wanted it to be a better country rather than just ditching the whole thing and going for reunification.
Mm,
That came about later.
Yep.
yeah. After the wall went down. Many young people made no attempt to cross the borders. There were students in universities who had parents who were working for the state. They couldn't leave everything, It would have
Yeah.
been quite hard.
Oh yeah,
so
there were people.
instead they
got stuck.
campaigned. And yeah, they wanted to see them as an independent country and successful.
So at this point, you could say that the people who are left within the country, they don't necessarily want reunification, but they want the GDR as a state to be thriving, and they want like more reform. They want reform over reunification at this point.
Mm.
And then my guy Gorbachev comes in
My God.
to Berlin.
Oi,
On
you've
October.
skipped a lot here.
Yeah, what the
Yeah.
hell? So like, yeah, we got Democracy Now, New Forum.
Artif, we're not being skimpy here. We're not like
Skimpy. Well,
They're
so
not in
yeah,
bold, so it's not
young
important.
people with family working government, they were staying. They didn't want reunification. They wanted reforms.
and Honecker got
Yeah,
ill.
Honecker
Ooh.
was, and over all this time, the government weren't really doing anything because Honecker was ill. They were kind of deadlocked. They didn't really know what to
Because
do.
Gorbachev
Hmm.
over
No
in
one's,
Russia, he was implementing,
yeah,
Glasnost
yeah,
Perestroika.
exactly. They
Loads
He
of
couldn't
was
things.
rely
trying to
on,
reform, and the SED were
yeah.
actively refusing that. They were ignoring
So
that.
the
They didn't want
USSR
it.
weren't supporting them, so they couldn't really say anything. Like they needed a leader, and Honecker was obviously ill. Had the operation to move his gallbladder,
Man was
and
old.
that
He was like
combined with
72 years old, man.
that, and
Why is he
that
still in
combined
power?
with the refusal to debate policy within the SED,
Hey
caused them to
guys,
just not engage
Yeah,
with these events.
what's the difference between Honecker and Krenz?
nothing. The same guy. One's just
Krenz's
really old.
gallbladder works.
Yeah.
Asif, have you not heard that one before?
No,
Shut
Well,
up,
you're
I
an
don't
that
idiot.
want
joke
There's
was
a popular
original.
joke in the
to.
TDO.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh shit then.
Um, this brought the government to a standstill in a time where they really needed to react, maybe introduce some minor reforms
But of
to
course,
show the population that they should stay and that they were doing something.
even if Honecker was well, they probably would have been slow and lag behind because the SED were
Mhm.
quite out of touch. They weren't
Yeah,
exactly
precisely. Their political,
prioritizing
like,
reactions.
their organization was quite weak in, like, quick reactions, and that was, like, a problem for the USSR as well. And then it was in this environment that Gorbachev arrived in Berlin on the 6th of October 1989. We'll go over
Bogdan
that
better not
now.
start swearing when he gets back.
It's
Yeah.
fine. I'll just perma-mute him.
This is haram.
Okay.
Alright, anyways,
Alright, so
he came in
Gorbachev,
to
yeah,
take
he
part
visited.
of the celebrations of the GDR's 40th anniversary, and the participants of the parade, they were chosen specifically to represent the strong, youthful, and loyal future of the GDR, because they wanted to show Gorbachev how great the GDR was. Unfortunately,
People didn't
most
care
people
about
who were
Honecker.
there, yeah, they kind of didn't care about Honecker, and
They ignored
Honecker
him.
stood there for hours saluting, whilst Gorbachev kind of just trotted in, and everyone's like,
Gorby.
Gorby. And yeah,
Yeah.
so 700 people got arrested for gate crashing celebrations and screaming Gorby. That was a great time. Anyways, after that, Gorbachev urged Honecker to implement the Soviet-style domestic reform.
And this
that
was a
many
big
other
surprise.
East European leaders
Honecker
had
really
implemented.
wanted Gorbachev to like reinforce and say like
Mm,
kind of like
Continue supporting the GDR.
yeah.
yeah, like get everyone to just calm down, guys. This isn't a big party, but it's not the end of the GDR. Instead, Gorbachev kind of like he put
Did
in
the opposite.
fire into the mix. He said, you know what?
I hate this place. We
yeah.
need reform.
This place is rubbish.
Go reform.
Why can't you be
Follow
more
what
like the
we're
FRG?
doing in
Stop
the
asking me for
USSR.
money.
Yeah.
And he said it on
Um,
TV, so everyone was kind of like, yo,
Whoa.
Hey.
what the fuck? He just
Just
criticized.
got called out on Jeremy Carl.
Yeah, our leader really is shit. It'd be like your friend like stabbing you in the back.
I feel like we're getting a bit off topic.
Oh yeah.
Anyways,
So yeah, Gorbachev was telling Honecker Soviet-style reforms needed, and of course Honecker, he didn't really
like,
want
no.
any of that. He was like, "No, it's the FRG's fault. We don't want your reforms."
yeah.
So Gorbachev says to
Um,
him, "I'm ending the Brezhnev doctrine. You don't have Soviet troops in here to support you anymore. You're on your own to a degree." Using force to control your people isn't really the right way to go about things. That was Gorbachev's view on it, which of course is kind of completely against the entire foundation of the GDR, which has been the
Mm.
Stasi, the Stasi, the Stasi.
Yeah. So that kind of
Stasi,
underpinned the
Soviets,
GDR's
everything.
existence.
Yeah.
Those Soviet forces had like they kept everything like although peaceful, there wouldn't be like reforms. And now they're gone, it kind of opened the door for that type of thing.
So then Gorbachev and Honecker, they had a bit of a poetry slam contest. They recited some quotes, showed off their English revision, and then
So after that,
Gorbachev left.
Gorbachev
Wait.
leaves on the 8th of October,
Yeah,
and
he went home.
the next day,
Pretty big quote.
pretty big. Oh,
One cannot be late, or one will be punished by life. The
Yeah.
G-
And
Yeah,
leader
Joseph,
replied,
I bet you were late to the test
Yikes.
those
today,
who are declared dead
tomorrow.
are those who live a long time.
Oh, roasted.
It was pretty cool. I was like, it's a good exchange of words. But the fact that he warned Honecker,
Joseph, I
showed that he was
deliberately
kind of
glossed
opposed to the
over this
GDR.
fluff.
Yeah, for
It's
real.
important.
Like,
it's
It's not
important.
no,
important.
no. Who is
I
gonna
think
fill
like
in
that's
these
a
quotes
good
on the
quote.
exam, Joseph?
Whatever, 70,000
Good quote.
people gathered outside the St. Nikolai Church in Leipzig to protest. Oh, and
Yeah.
this is when Honecker, he ordered the Stasi, he ordered like increased like medical supplies and blood to Leipzig, and he had the protesters surrounded, and that scared a lot of people because Honecker, he thought Tiananmen Square was a good time. He
Good
supported
mascot.
that. Yeah, good murder of your innocent protesters. So people were very
And all
worried.
people were shook.
And it's
Like,
rumored
what if
that
he does that to us?
the order to fire was received but never acted on. But if it
No one will
was,
know.
even the Stasi at this point, they weren't
They were quite
exactly
shook.
confident in their orders. They didn't really want to follow them anymore. They weren't blindly loyal.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to fire upon non-violent, completely peaceful protesters because they made a point of being peaceful and non-violent.
Yeah, and there was a real
Now,
risk of a civil war. Like, if this happened,
Hmm.
it may have
People would
calmed things,
definitely-
and it may
yeah.
have, but it also may have put fire in the mix. People might have like, I mean, and the Soviet troops are gone, so people might have actually physically rebelled.
Now, regardless of whether they did receive orders or not, they didn't open fire, and this lack of violence led to even more protests.
Bogdan, we're doing a podcast.
And without the Soviet forces not reinforcing the SED, they kind of couldn't hold back the forces. And the basic demands for the protest was that they wanted freedom of speech, they wanted to like be able to assemble, and they wanted to like be able to travel. That was their main thing. They wanted to travel to like FRG and wherever else they wanted.
Guys, if I can, I just want to bring to your attention how many pages we have left. There's quite a lot of pages. There's
I mean, I did point
like
that out, and you were, oh no, it's fine.
10 pages.
I did say we should start from the beginning,
No.
but you know, whatever.
Start from the beginning.
Yeah, let's make it worse. Wait, so when's? Oh man.
Oh man.
Well, this
oh,
this
man.
end bit
Ah.
is kind of really recent and can be easily summarized. Also, one of these pages is
Yeah,
blank.
that's true.
It's not that
let's-
bad, and like one of them's a mind
it's
map,
not
and
that
that's kind of.
Anyways, we're
Let's
kind of
speed it
waffling
up.
now. So, what comes next?
So basically, there
Eh,
were more demonstrations in other cities,
Yep.
Dresden, Berlin. Yeah, the protesters wanted the same thing. People were getting increasingly unhappy with the SED. Yeah, Honecker was getting really decrepit. He was 77. His gallbladder was busted. He didn't want to talk to the protesters. He didn't want to, form the Stasi kind of operations. I think he put aside. No, that's something else.
But you went
uh,
debating or something, or
We're
you just like,
doing podcast.
We're doing a podcast.
Shut up,
So-
Bug.
Yeah.
did I just interrupt?
Yes, you
Yeah.
did.
Who are you doing a podcast for?
Yes, that's why I said
Holocaust.
we're doing a podcast. Oh, right.
No, he said who?
Anyone.
We're
No
we're
one
doing
in
it for
particular.
ourselves.
It's easier to
And for
kind of,
everyone.
stay on topic if we're doing podcasts. Maybe send it to group chat if one person wants to watch it.
Yeah, man. Anyways,
So people were tired of Honecker. They realized he had to go.
and therefore,
So Krenz was, of course, the.
Oh yeah,
next
guys, I just want to
logical
say,
successor.
anyone watching, if you want to follow along, we're just using the yellow revision guide, so that'll make it a
Yeah.
lot easier to like
Yeah.
read what we're actually talking about.
So yeah, people were tired of Honecker's complete inflexibility, so they asked him to resign on 17th of October. Honecker, surprisingly, like initially he was like, "What? I don't want to be fired," but then he actually voted for his own removal because he's that good of a
stick to the
communist.
socialist views.
What
Yep.
a guy!
What a communist. Anyways, Krenz was basically the same as Honecker.
Yeah, except his gallbladder worked.
Basically, he did little to reform the party or the system as a whole, and everyone in East Germany kind of just realized he was not the leader that they were hoping for. And he attempted to satisfy protesters by easing travel restrictions and like meeting with
He
church
also
leaders and stuff.
rejected old
But-
Politburo members.
Yeah,
and
he
Honecker
kind
and
of
his wife from the
kinda kicked
party.
out
Arguing
everyone.
Honecker.
Kicked out a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Propaganda
then-
saying the FRG were treating the people poorly, so the people wouldn't want to go there. course, that wasn't very useful
propaganda
because
stepped
it
up.
was kind of a known quantity at that point that
Mm.
the FRG is where the good stuff is.
There was a huge demonstration in Berlin in early November. 1 million people was broadcast on television. 2 days later, another big one, 500,000 march through Leipzig. That really showed like now it's very widespread. There weren't that many people in the GDR, so that amount of
Mm.
people shows that it was really significant. It played like a huge part in people's everyday life. Like this is probably
Yeah.
all they talked about.
So this point, very soon after Krenz was brought in, is when talk of reunification first started to emerge. People
So
were
this is where the
starting
the
to
mindset
think.
shifts. Now, people instead of wanting internal reform, now they want a united Germany, and that's kind of where it all like snowballs very quickly. So he kind of promised that women's passports would have like access to the West, and then everyone from the Politburo resigns on the 9th of November.
This is everyone.
Literally everyone.
So
And
his
then
plan is to everyone will get passports and will be given visas to go to the West. But of course,
Hmm.
those have to be applied for. They can be regulated, etc., etc. There's still a degree of
Yeah,
control.
everything's kind of going
But
to shit at this point.
Gunter Schabowski, Joseph, don't swear.
big up
He's
Schabowski.
answering
Oh,
questions in a
oh.
press conference. He's not really up to speed. He's exhausted. He reads a note from Krenz. He announces this kind of new policy of everyone can kind of go to the West, can travel to the West. But he
Immediately.
glosses over the fact that it doesn't begin immediately, and also people have to apply. So he just shrugs and goes, "Yeah, it's open," and people flood to the wall. The guards at the wall have no idea what's going on. There's a lot of back and forth. I believe at some places there's potential people getting shot up, but
No one got
nothing-
shot up.
No, but no one did. But there was like the threat of it. So
Yeah.
then eventually, a lot of generals independently just made the call, open the wall. Easterners were able to flood into the West. The Berlin Wall came down that day.
Pretty much.
Momento.
Now, the collapse of the SED government and the impact of the elections of March 1990. So, around in November 1989, more than 5 million East Germans visited West Berlin, which is pretty significant because that's
That's
almost
a lot of people.
that's the most.
Considering
there's
how
ever
many
been,
East Germans there
like,
were,
in a single
there's a lot of people in
Yeah.
1 month.
pretty much. And that, which is quite obvious, like the impact that would have. Like a lot of people are seeing how the West
Yeah.
is.
Over a
how
million
FRG
actually
impact
stayed
is.
there, and a lot of people were
Yeah.
just scouting out. Like it's like visiting like your. Like, they're looking for like houses and shit, you know. Yeah. Us
Stop
watching.
swearing.
Don't
So-
say swears.
Kid.
Yeah, like my brain isn't censoring
Oh,
itself
for
anymore.
real, man. Anyways, this kind of weakened the party's like power, and people were kind of just like losing faith in the system and the leadership. And Krenz kind of like kept promising stuff, but they were kind of like,
People didn't really care anymore.
Yeah,
They just
no one
wanted
really cared.
reunification. No one really was
Yeah,
concerned
they didn't
with the
want,
fate of
like-
the GDR.
yeah.
More promises.
Yeah, and there was like a lot of division forming within the party where like people within the party were like, hey, maybe like reunification is pretty good. Yeah, many East Germans moved towards rapid reunification with the FRG, and the last action of the SED was essentially the promotion of Hans Modrow, who kind of fronted a relaunched party, or he kind of made a new party called the PDS. So he dropped the SED. He's like, okay, we're called the PDS now. And he kind of had a reputation as a reformist, and Gorbachev kind of liked Modrow. And he introduced stuff like free elections and more economic reforms. And yeah. But eventually, when there was a new election, the CDU was elected in
Well, that's the church one.
the government. That's as a Christian Democratic Union, and they were basically the Alliance for Germany party. So at this point, that you've got a government in power, a party in power that wants to reunify, and as soon as they came into power, or that was that, they instantly put in reforms for reunification.
Not
They won
necessarily
by
reunification, but they
48%
began the
vote.
process.
Yeah, they began the
they were the
process.
only party who were for rapid reunification. All the other
Yeah.
ones were taking more moderate approaches because they felt that that was the most realistic
Yeah.
approach. But what
But
the people
nah.
wanted was rapid reunification,
Rapid.
and
Yeah,
that's
they
why
were
the
fed up
CDU
of, you
got so
know,
much
like
support.
politicians.
And
They were
that's
just
why
like, just do it now.
Democracy Now! And New Forum, they kind of failed. So they all kind of joined together with IFM to create Alliance 90, and they only got 3% of the vote because they were being very kind of moderate and crowd pleasing, which kind of was their
Right.
downfall because they were not very notable. They weren't. They didn't have a point. Speaking of not
Yeah.
having a point,
Interesting, yeah.
And this basically leads to the reunification. So at
Yeah.
first, the currency union took place on the 1st of July, and this was this had quite a big impact on both the FRG and the GDR, because the GDR Deutschmark wasn't as valuable as the FRG
too
currency.
significant.
And then Western products flooded the East, and therefore they couldn't really export anything because no one really wanted it anymore, since they had good Western consumer goods and products. And this in turn, employment rose in the East. Strikes became more common. There was a case of where 250,000 farmers demonstrated against the ending of subsidies and the overall increase in competition in Europe. And then on the 31st of August, the Unification Treaty was signed. And it was called and then the 2+4 Treaty was signed in September, which was basically
So, yeah,
a
the
legitimate
unification.
reunification, which
that
was
all
agreed
the
by.
wartime allies relinquishing all the claims they had on Germany. They were
Yeah.
no longer
Jesus
saying
Christ.
we own these bits. It was now that's all Germany.
So it was like the
That's
legal
all
stuff, like
Yeah.
officializing.
Oh, and also the USSR only agreed if NATO troops and weapons would not be stationed in the ex-GDR. So Germany was allowed to be in NATO, just so long as that didn't pose a threat to Russia.
Yeah.
They were fine with it.
And so Kohl, who was the chancellor of the FRG, he played a pretty big role in the reunification along with the CDU, because he kind of put forward this 10-point plan for redevelopment and proposed a federal system for the whole of Germany, and he kind of steered the ship towards reunification. But not every leader had the same kind of reaction to the looming reunification as the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher
Boo.
and the French Prime Minister Mitterrand.
Boo.
Yeah, they were kind of scared. They didn't really want reunification because they didn't want a really powerful Germany coming back.
Yeah, they're
Raving
kinda
nut.
selfish, really.
You should
Yeah,
see
pretty
the
selfish, but
you should see the
Brits.
sources in the textbook. That guy was not happy about German reunification.
Oh.
Prime Minister. He was very
Frenchies.
mad about
But-
it.
Who?
So it won't happen. It will never happen. It
President
can't
of
happen.
France.
What's happening? No, that's a bad thing.
Oh wait, it happened. Damn it. Kind of,
So,
yeah.
yeah, Thatcher, she
Um,
was scared
supposed to
about
happen.
United Powerful Germany because she's a racist and thinks they're going to do World War III again.
Well, they didn't, but
She was
Freaking
also
Commonwealth
worried
Nazis.
that a united Germany would undermine Gorbachev, and that would make Gorbachev very unhappy.
Yeah,
And-
she wanted Britain to be the most significant power in Europe, and obviously a unified Germany would pose a huge threat to that.
But then
Still
somewhat-
trade, that type of thing.
Somewhat counterintuitively, she was also worried that united Germany could lean towards the Soviet side of things.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
kind of dumb, but hey ho. But the Americans, on the other hand, were pretty
George
happy.
Bush.
Yeah, my guy George Bush, he was like, "Hey, this is pretty great, because a united Germany, and the end to the
Great.
Cold War,
Yeah,
kind of
end
gave
of
the
Cold
US
War,
an
that is the
opportunity
biggest
to,
part.
yeah, that's a pretty huge thing, because
Yeah,
Cold
Huge
War
opportunity to
ending,
cut back spending.
uniting of Germany, cut back spending on defense, and the USA really encouraged the reunification.
And
And this
George,
kind of like
because of this
overshadowed the
US
British.
endorsement, it meant that the British-French alliance of no was ultimately quite useless because they couldn't really
Yeah.
do anything.
they were just second to the USA really. George Bush in public, I think he was a bit like reserved about his opinion.
But
I
in
think he
private,
kind of realized behind the scenes, hey, this is really good for the USA.
he definitely had
So
a drink
they should
up.
support this. Yeah.
And Gorbachev, he was kind of like, hey,
He was kind of scared
what's
about losing a bit of his buffer zone.
yeah,
The biggest thing that kind of won him over is that Cole agreed to pay to get all the Soviet troops out of the
Yeah.
GDR and relocated
He
elsewhere. It
12 billion Deutschmarks.
because Russia,
quite
they
a lot
were
of
kind of
money.
in dire straits at this point. They were pretty poor as well. They couldn't
Yeah, they
exactly
need, like,
afford to
instant,
relocate all
like,
these troops.
Gratification.
There you go.
Like at this point,
In
the
the form
USSR
of
is
money.
also falling, so
Yeah.
Fun.
They
they're
were
not
just trying
doing
to
so
like
great
save
either.
themselves. They were like, they saw an out, like, well, it's a lot of money, let's take it.
Yeah.
12 billion Deutschmarks.
Read the
million billion.
consequences.
12 billion Deutschmarks is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
So yeah.
An assessment of the role, Cole. That didn't English very well.
It's German.
Yikes. He was seen as the architect of unification because of his 10-point plan. He had great like relationships with both George Bush and
Yeah.
Gorbachev.
George
Um, Yikes. Uh,
Indeed.
he had a really like strong role as like a leader of world prestige. And this
wait,
kind of
wait,
helped
an
with
aside
his
for a second,
re-election.
If George Bush was president when reunification was happening, that was like 1990. How was he president when 9/11 happened? That was like 11 years later.
Different George Bush.
Did he have split
Yeah,
term?
this-
No, but this
no.
picture,
As a,
the picture in the
George
revision
Bush
guide is
Senior,
of George Bush Jr.
George Bush
That's
Yeah.
thrown me. That's thrown me.
That's probably
Come on, Miss
an
Howlett,
error.
get your. Wait, it's probably Miss Bryce.
Oh, we got
Come on, Miss
rated.
Bryce, get your act together.
What a misplay.
Wrong George Bush.
Oh,
Run
that's
it
too many
down
bushes
mid right there.
anyways.
Okay, whatever.
Like,
Political dynasty.
Moving on.
Moving slowly on.
monkey see.
Slowly,
monkey
not
do.
swiftly.
I'm a gorilla.
Back on topic.
Thank you, Bogdan.
Lost page, guys. Lost page.
Last page,
Last
right.
page.
Accession of the Eastern territories to
Wait,
West
did
Germany.
we even
So-
say anything? Like Cole's role was just
Yeah,
like
Cole
basically.
did some
But
great
he could have
stuff.
also
Everyone
been in the
happy
right
with
place at
Cole.
the right time. That was one of the arguments. It was kind
Yeah, I
of like inevitable,
guess.
and he just kind of like pushed it along.
Although
Yeah.
some people
Whatever.
do say he was quite intelligent, he took advantages of opportunities,
He was
quite
very shrewd.
intellectual.
He was
Either way, that's what it is.
So the
So,
formal accession of the
accession.
Eastern Territories, accession,
it happened
accession.
on 3rd October.
happened on the 3rd of
Um,
October. 5 old states of the GDR became states of the FRG. East and West Berlin united to form one city-state in the FRG.
Just one whole Berlin.
Guess the Berlin. Oh wait, was it already knocked down? Can't remember.
Yep.
The two states did not merge. The GDR has been absorbed into the FRG, and like the Berlin Wall, dismantled. Public approval of Cole's reunification was evident in the election results of December 1990. They won by 44%, 60% of the seats in the new Bundestag. So that's a pretty big
Bundestag.
victory.
Bundes-
Shows that the public
Been in there.
approved. Created hope and optimism for the future of Germany. There's still people alive who were there when the wall was originally erected.
Yeah.
And it kind of marked a new age, especially with DSR falling as well. The territorial accession was easier than achieving social and economic integration. And GDR civilians lived under SED rule for 40 years. It could not be changed by drastic measures.
Sick.
I believe
Sick.
that is us.
Monkey see. Monkey do. I'm a gorilla.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, boy.
And
much.
3, 2, 1.